your notes.
Excellent.
Okay.
And I've started the recording. So I think now we hold until noon.
Okay.
Sound good?
Yep,
Yeah.
I'm going to close myself out, or at least
Yeah, chat looks good. Q&A looks good. Since we have a minute, I'll mention that I heard from Amanda Booth this morning that they're actually planning a session to talk about their new alternative compliance program. And I think they might be interested in publicizing it a little bit more widely. So afterward, we can talk about how we can maybe help them get the word out on that.
Sounds good. Mr. Began, hey, Chris.
Hello. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
I'll mention one other thing that's kind of funny. I ran into Jared Blumenfeld on the street in San Francisco yesterday and was shooting the breeze with him. He's the former Cal EPA secretary and former regional administrator in my office. And I told him what we were up to. He was really interested in it. And he asked me to send him some info on it. And, you know, we'll see if in his new walks of life, he can help us. He's managing a fund that manages gigantic amounts of money for environmental and social good. So we shall see, but I thought that was kind of funny that he was so interested in this.
Yeah, that's great. Small world.
Yeah.
And for those of you joining us, welcome. We will be starting the webinar promptly at noon, so in about 3 minutes. So just go ahead and sit tight. We'll be up soon. All right, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. It's noon on February 9th, 2023, and welcome everybody to Storm Seminar, the strategy to optimize resource management of stormwater at the State Water Quality Control Board, Division of Water Quality. We have these storm seminars, we used to have them more frequently, and we're trying to kind of kick them back up again. And today we're happy to present a seminar on the building blocks for offsite stormwater credit programs. My name is Amanda McGee. I'm the unit lead for the storms unit at DWQ. And I have some folks with me today who are experts on this matter, and are gonna give you, I would say everything you need to know, but that's gonna be more than an hour and a half. So some of what you need to know for the next hour and a half. Next slide, Daniel. Yeah, so I just wanted to give a brief overview of kind of what we're looking at today. This will be a panel presentation from Daniel Abt, Dave Smith, and Chris Crumpton. They will introduce themselves in just a moment. If you have questions, I encourage you to use the question and answer tool. We will be taking or answering questions at the end. So just as we go, if you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the Q&A. There is the ability to upvote questions or like questions. So if someone asks something that you also are interested in, I encourage you to like it, and we will at the end go through and pick the questions that are the most liked and I think the most relevant, and go from there. This presentation will also it is being recorded, and it will be uploaded to the Storms website, and we will email everybody the link once that is uploaded and ready to be viewed. We will also try, if we don't get to all of the questions at the end of this webinar, we will try to, we will send out the questions to the panelists and send out an answer to everybody that's here today. So that might take longer than getting the webinar uploaded, but we will be following up with everyone on that one. And then a real quick kind of why are we doing this? Stormwater credit programs, I feel like that terminology has been kind of thrown around for quite a while, and it just keeps getting more and more interest coming in. And especially since the August 2022 water supply strategy was released. And in it, the governor suggested that very specifically called out the potential for stormwater crediting systems that will help offset the cost of completing stormwater capture projects. So it's really a key kind of way to encourage these public-private partnerships. And so we thought that we should kind of get the conversation rolling and give you some examples and some thoughts to think about if folks are interested in developing the stormwater credit programs. Next slide, please, Daniel. I got one more thing to say before I hand it over to these guys. So the Storm Seminar Series is an open forum to feature new research, technologies, policies, and news related to stormwater. The opinions expressed in these presentations and on the following slides are solely those of the presenters and not necessarily those of the State Water Board. And we do not guarantee the accuracy of reliability of the information provided herein, although I can say that these guys are pretty trustworthy, and you should probably take heed to what they have to say. I also want to note, you know, we don't have an official statewide capture credit program yet. So our current credit approaches will vary from permit to permit. And so I just want to remind everyone that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. You're going to hear today a lot of ideas, a lot of thoughts, but there's no this will fix everything and this will work for everybody. That's going to guarantee compliance, right, with all of our permits. So I want to encourage everyone who's listening, who's thinking about this, to carefully read the actual terms of your applicable water board permits before developing a stormwater credit program. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Daniel. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Amanda, for having us present on the building blocks for offsite stormwater credit programs. My name is Daniel Apt, and I've been working on stormwater credit programs for the past 7 years, assisting the County of Orange since 2016 and the City of Anaheim since 2017 with the development of their programs. I've also been talking with storm staff about this topic for the past couple of years. Along with me today are Dave Smith, who is now a water policy consultant with Water Innovation Services after retiring from US EPA, where he managed several Clean Water Act permitting, financing, and assessment programs, and several projects focused on water quality credit and trading and stormwater program innovation. We also have Chris Crompton, who initiated a number of program funding studies for the County of Orange in 2016, as well as started a collaborative effort between the County of Orange, the North Orange County MS4 permittees, and the Construction Industry Coalition on Water Quality to evaluate a water quality credit and trading program for North Orange County. So there is quite a bit of complexity with stormwater credit programs, and today we're going to provide you with just the building blocks of stormwater credit programs. We'll start our presentation where I will present the basic elements of stormwater credit programs, identify some benefits and why you should consider development of a stormwater credit program, as well as provide some possibilities of the types of projects that can generate credits. I'll then turn it over to my colleague Dave, who will talk about potential eligible dischargers, and then to Chris, who will talk about the use of credits. We will then go into regulatory and legal considerations, as well as discuss what is involved with program administration. The main part of today's presentation, however, will be a discussion with my colleagues about the key considerations and decision points about stormwater credit programs. As there's a lot to consider and several decision points, we'll touch on several, but there are many more that we will not cover due to the time we have today. We will finish up with the keys to success in developing stormwater credit programs, as well as some next steps. So this graphic shows the basic concept of offsite stormwater crediting. Credits are generated through the capture of stormwater in what we are identifying as credit generators. And I'll discuss a bit later the potential types of credit generators. Once generated, the credits are placed in a credit bank that stores the credits for future use. Once there are credits in the credit bank, an eligible credit user, and we'll talk more about eligibility a little bit later, can purchase the credits instead of implementing on-site structural stormwater systems or structural BMPs. We'll talk a little bit more about eligibility later in the presentation. The credit user purchases credits available based on their needs, and funds used for the purchase are deposited into a credit account that handles financial transactions and houses the funds from the sale of credits. Funds in the credit account are then used to reimburse the credit generator or credit generators. At the center of this diagram is program administration, which oversees the program, including the credit generators, the credit bank, the credit users, and the credit account. And I will discuss the other potential responsibilities of the program administrator a bit later. This graphic provides the concept of a stormwater credit program, but there are many more options as to how a stormwater credit program is configured and how both credit and financial transactions are carried out. We wanted to clarify the general difference between stormwater credit programs and fee in lieu approaches. Basically, a stormwater credit program means build it and they will come, meaning credits are generated by offsite stormwater capture projects. Credits are used by stormwater discharges instead of constructing BMPs on site. As opposed to a fee in lieu, which is pay us and we will build it, essentially meaning that stormwater dischargers pay into a fund for offsite stormwater projects instead of constructing on site. And offsite stormwater projects are constructed by the fund manager, usually by a certain date. So for fee in lieu, we usually see a requirement in permits that these projects be built by a certain date based on the occupancy of the first development project that uses the fee in lieu option. There are many reasons why you should consider offsite stormwater crediting and the development of a stormwater credit program. And I've identified the primary ones here. However, there are likely others as well. First and foremost, we think of stormwater credit programs as a funding program to assist in building stormwater capture projects. So these programs are a source of funding. Expedited water quality and watershed improvement is another benefit to these programs. As with a source of funding for more sustainable and beneficial stormwater capture projects that can be constructed quicker, thus providing expedited water quality and watershed improvement. We're able to meet water quality regulations with these programs more efficiently, and these programs incentivize more sustainable, integrated, and multi-benefit projects in more of the watershed, thus enabling stormwater capture that assists with water supply, flood control, urban greening, smart streets, as well as other benefits. More stormwater capture makes for a more sustainable future, especially in California. Small scale BMPs do put a significant burden on municipalities and private development with their planning, design, review and approvals, inspections, and O&M. And stormwater credit programs can help to consolidate those activities. Credit users will also have flexibility to have more cost-effective land development and redevelopment options. And finally, operation and maintenance of stormwater capture systems is an ongoing issue, and stormwater credit programs can provide more reliable and funded long-term O&M. So stormwater programs are currently planning for the future and developing funding portfolios to fund their programs as well as future projects. A diversified approach with many potential funding sources is a smart and sustainable path to a successful stormwater program. And stormwater credit programs are a spoke in the wheel of a stormwater funding portfolio and can help to achieve a diversified approach and ultimately a sustainable and successful stormwater program. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about credit generators. So credit generators are stormwater capture projects from existing discharge areas that can be regional or distributed in nature. The responsibilities of credit generators include project design and documentation of the capture capacity, project construction, ongoing operation and maintenance, and inspections and reporting. The types of credit generator facilities have the potential to be very diverse types of systems that can include infiltration systems, stormwater capture and use, diversion to sanitary sewer via controlled or delayed stormwater diversions, bioretention or green infrastructure, and porous pavement and smart streets. I'm going to talk a little bit more about those. So we have divided credit generators into two categories, with public projects being the first category. This includes regional retention projects, and those could be implemented by the MS4 community, water districts, or flood control districts, similar to what we see as a concept in the city of Anaheim, collaboration project between MS4 and a water district to recharge a water district basin. They can be regional diversion to sanitary sewer via controlled or delayed diversions. This would include storage, pre-treatment, and then diversion once a storm has passed. This is similar to what we see in the Murray Park Sanitary Sewer Diversion Concept Project in Huntington Beach. We could also see public parcel green infrastructure retrofit projects with bioretention, porous pavement, stormwater capture use, and infiltration. And this can be done in public parcels such as parks, similar to the Orange Memorial Park in South San Francisco that we see here. And then finally, this could also be public green street or green infrastructure projects, such as bioretention or porous pavement, similar to the Southgate Green Street project in Palo Alto. The second category of credit generators is private projects. This category might be a bit more controversial, but private generation of credits could be the silver bullet in the stormwater capture game, in that if we can incentivize stormwater capture where there is a potential profit to be made by a private entity, we could potentially harness the power of the free market for stormwater capture. Additionally, private generation could help to reduce the burden on the public sector to build stormwater capture infrastructure. Private generation projects could include regional retention projects through infiltration or stormwater harvesting. This could be done by developers, public-private partnerships, or homeowners associations. This would be bringing offsite stormwater likely onto a site. So similar to a concept we developed in Orange County for the Legacy Campus offsite drainage concept. Additionally, private generation projects could be on-site commercial and industrial retrofit project. So in California, in urban areas, what do we have an abundance of due to our car-oriented culture? We have parking lots. And so on-site commercial retrofits with either underground infiltration or storage systems or green infrastructure could provide commercial sites with another use, a multi-benefit of those parking lots and another method for profit for those commercial facilities. And then finally, we have on-site residential retrofit projects. They could be incentivized as credit generators, especially where there are no stormwater fees in place and therefore no possibility to reduce fees with a residential retrofit. So this could include systems such as bioretention, porous pavement, stormwater capture and use. This would, however, require more oversight, and some of the benefits of more regional systems would not be realized, but it could be a game changer to reduce the burden on the public sector to build stormwater capture infrastructure. Now I will pass it over to Dave, who's going to talk about potentially eligible discharges.
Well, thanks, Daniel. And thanks to Storms and all of you for joining us today. More than 240 people here. I'm really happy to see that. we wanted to talk about who might actually be interested in pursuing offsite credit trading as a way to meet some or all of their stormwater permit obligations. Most credit trading programs around the country have focused on offsite crediting to meet post-construction requirements, also known in some areas as newer redevelopment requirements and MS4 permits. However, there's emerging interest in making offsite credit trading available as an option for also meeting different kinds of stormwater permit requirements. It may be possible to meet other MS4 requirements through purchase of credits from projects elsewhere in the watershed, like water quality or TMDL-based requirements or trash control obligations. The opportunities for using offsite controls may also make sense to consider for other types of stormwater discharges. Industrial stormwater dischargers are increasingly interested in having offsite controls available as a potentially more cost-effective mechanism for water quality improvement and permit compliance. Similarly, Caltrans, the transportation agency, is already financing offsite projects in some cities to help meet some of their MS4 requirements under their separate MS4 permit, as their on-site control possibilities may be limited in some areas, and offsite controls may be more cost-effective for them. Finally, many of you know that in several parts of the country, new NPDES permits are being proposed to regulate discharges from commercial, industrial, and institutional land uses that don't fall under other existing permits. There's substantial interest in authorizing use of offsite controls as one method of meeting their control requirements under these new permits. Authorizing use of offsite credit trading may not make sense for all of these types of stormwater discharges and may require permit revisions in some cases to more clearly authorize their use. But we wanted to mention the possibility of broadening eligibility to take advantage of offsite credit trading, as it could enable us to more effectively address stormwater issues at watershed scales and develop more integrated stormwater solutions. Now I'd like to turn it over to Chris, who's going to discuss the roles of potential credit users.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks to Storms also. I'm glad to be here today. Dave's covered the potential users, so I won't repeat them. They're shown on the slide here. The key responsibilities of the credit user are pretty much upfront in the stormwater credit program, unless there is a credit renewal required. The Washington, D.C. program, for example, does have a requirement that you have to renew credits on a periodic basis. So a user would likely have to come in on a periodic basis in that program, whereas in most other programs, the user is sort of like a one and done at the front end. And the responsibilities of the credit user, obviously, like in any development or project, you have to determine the design volume of obligations that you have. And then you would purchase credits for all or a portion of the design volume. Daniel talked previously about that this could be a blended program, and that's so you could cover all or just a portion. You would have to document the credits in your development plan. Some people have a LID plan, some people have a WQMP, some people have other mechanisms, but the credits would have to be documented as a way of compliance. And then our feeling that you should continue to implement LID site design and source controls. That's certainly a discussion point. But it does seem that there are certain features that are reasonable and feasible that could continue to be done at sites, such as disconnection of impervious areas and the like, which are logical and reasonable things to continue to do. And then there's the issue of O&M. The user will be responsible either for paying upfront for the O&M or setting up long-term payments by future site users. And so that's really the responsibilities. And I think Daniel has already somewhat touched on motivations, and Dave maybe a little bit, but the motivations for being a credit user would be that it might be more streamlined for you. It would simplify your lid plan or WQMP or equivalent. You wouldn't have to do design in it. You would simply be buying the credits and documenting the credits. It would give you more flexibility as to where BMPs are going to be placed. Is it on-site? Is it off-site? Is it a mixture? And then finally, I think the other motivation might be that Daniel pointed to the power of the market early on, and that potentially could be lower costs as efficiencies are gained. This would obviously have to be studied as these programs move forward, but I think there's an underpinning feeling that would certainly be the case. So next slide to Dave.
If we're going to pursue use of offsite credit trading to help meet stormwater permit requirements and meet other goals, we need to make sure to do it right and do it in a way that meets legal and regulatory requirements. This will require careful attention to the details in setting up the programs and the permits that authorize their use. I want to be clear here that while I used to manage EPA's regional permits program, I'm no longer with EPA. So I am not speaking for the state or federal regulatory agencies. But we just wanted to reflect what we've heard in discussions with regulators, NGOs, permittees, and others about regulatory and legal considerations that need to be looked at in developing sound offsite crediting programs. On the permitting side of things, it's worth noting that many existing stormwater permits around the country and in California have included very general language permitting use of offsite compliance approaches like offsite crediting programs in some cases. But there's been little use of that authority overall to date, in part because in many cases, the permit language is not setting clear expectations about how this would really work in practice. It's important for the permits to be very clear about what types of permit requirements can be met through participation in offsite credit trading and by whom. Many current programs require controls to be done on site unless it's shown to be very infeasible to do so. Now, these very strict limitations may have their good reasons, but limiting the use of offsite controls may severely limit the potential to create and operate offsite credit programs, and in many cases may not be necessary at all to protect and improve water quality if the offsite programs are designed and implemented in the right ways. Permits also may need to specify the basic program elements that need to be addressed in a robust offsite crediting program, while still providing some flexibility to adjust program details to local circumstances and goals. It's also important to lay out the process through which the permitting agency would work with the proponent of the program to review and approve a credit trading program, and specify tracking and reporting expectations so project proponents and regulators all have a clear idea of who is going to do what and what are they getting into going forward. Similarly, careful attention to the legal framework of a credit trading program is also critical. Several options may be available to organize a strong credit trading program. It may be possible for the permittee to administer a credit trading program itself, or to make arrangements with other agencies, private organizations, nonprofits, or public-private partnerships to administer the program. While there are certainly other important legal considerations in setting up the program, I wanted to highlight the importance of one issue: being clear about who is ultimately responsible for permit compliance when credit trading is used. Does compliance liability transfer to the credit generator when a credit is sold? Or does the buyer of that credit retain any type of compliance responsibility? There's different ways this question can be answered, but it will be critical that both buyers and sellers of stormwater management credits have a full understanding of their responsibilities, their liabilities, and that the permitting agency knows who's responsible for compliance. Now, Daniel is going to discuss more of the program administration considerations.
So the structure of program administrators or the program administration may vary considerably for each individual program. There are some general responsibilities of program administrator, but there are likely others as well. And it shouldn't be noted that there is a lot that a program administrator would be responsible for. This includes creating crediting framework and for crediting sales and purchases, reviewing credit generator and credit user documents and applications, calculating credit adjustments and everything that goes into that, comprehensive tracking of credits for the credit program trading areas via the credit bank. Also managing the credit account, the financial transactions, the receivables from credit users, and the payables to credit generators. There's also comprehensive reporting on the status of the program to the permitted agency, and that will vary depending upon what the permit requirements are. There's also a requirement to inspect credit generation facilities to ensure that they are functioning properly. These inspections would also be required during construction, at final verification to make sure that their systems are actually built to design, and generating the credits as proposed, and then ongoing through the life of essentially a credit generation facility to make sure that they're properly being operated and maintained. And then also completing program audits. There will likely be an auditing element that covers credit tracking and use, the financial components of a program, and this may likely be done by a third party. We'll talk during our discussion about who could potentially serve as a credit program administrator when we get to that portion. Finally, before we get into our discussion, I wanted to just touch on credit adjustments and what's meant by that. Credit adjustments can be made in a stormwater credit program to account for uncertainties within that program. The first set of adjustments that you see here, we put in the category of other adjustments, and can include adjustments based on funding received for a project. If there are restrictions on that funding source, such as grant program guidelines, the credits generated with those funds may not be able to be sold. An alternative other adjustment could be adjustments based on differences in land use for credit generators and credit users. And then finally, another adjustment might be for downstream water body impairments. We also have an adjustment identified here for existing BMPs in the drainage area of a credit generator, where that volume of runoff is already addressed by on-site BMPs. And so the credits generated would need to be reduced to account for this. We're not living in a vacuum. We know that where we place these credit generation facilities, there may already be BMPs in that drainage area for on-site development. There may also need to be future BMP adjustments if on-site BMPs are constructed in the drainage area of an existing credit generator. So this would have to be accounted for and those credits essentially removed from the bank. We also have a net watershed or water quality benefit adjustment, as we would always want to provide a net benefit to the watershed to help provide expedited water quality and watershed improvement, something we're all striving for. However, what that net benefit could vary quite a bit depending upon each program. We also want to make sure that we have a resilient stormwater credit program, and so we need to account for and reserve credits for catastrophic failure of credit generators due to something like an earthquake, or potentially loss in capacity of a credit generation facility due to operation and maintenance, which is more of a temporary issue, or we could see loss of capacity on a more permanent basis, such as reduction in infiltration rate that cannot be recovered. It is after these adjustments that are made, do we then have a volume of credits that are available for sale. And so due to these adjustments, it is never a 1-to-1 ratio. All right. We are now going to go into the portion of our presentation that is more of a discussion between Dave, Chris, and myself, where the intent is to discuss some key considerations and decision points and to try to provide some different perspectives. We will present the key considerations and decision points, and then we will attempt to provide potential perspectives, with Dave providing a regulated perspective, with me providing a credit program and a credit generator perspective, and Chris providing a credit user perspective. We want to note that there may be additional perspectives from these categories, and we encourage you to think about this, but we try to highlight general perspectives. Additionally, there are also other perspectives besides these categories that we will not touch on today, but could be something that is addressed in future stormwater credit program webinars. So the first key decision point and discussion item is who can generate credits. So in this context, we're primarily looking at public versus private. Most of the conversation has been focused on public generation, but there are different schools of thought with opportunities for private generation. There also could be a hybrid organization, such as a public-private partnership, that could generate credits as well. Higher level of scrutiny for credit generators with verification of construction and ongoing O&M may be needed, and maybe even more so for private generation projects. Many types of public generation could be implemented, including MS4, parks, water districts, and transportation and schools. Private generation may open up areas where there is no public land or opportunities. In private generation, there will likely be an easement, maybe needed for access to verify O&M. There's also the issue of long-term perpetuity of credit generation. This may occur through county recording. There's also an issue of the flexibility for the use of property for another use in the future. So not necessarily locking up a particular credit generation facility for perpetuity, but then the credits that are generated with that facility do have to be addressed. Now I'm going to turn it over to Dave, that's going to give a bit of a regulatory perspective on this. Dave?
The overarching concern that I think we've heard from regulatory agencies, and actually we've heard very similar things from some of the NGOs and other stakeholder groups that we've talked to, is there's an overarching need to have robust, transparent, accountable programs, no matter who the credit generators or the credit users are, and so that there's confidence that they will deliver the benefits and the performance that was promised. With respect to credit generation, in California, I would say we've heard more concern about whether private entities will have the legal, financial, and technical capabilities that are needed to construct and maintain offsite projects that really do deliver. Elsewhere in the country, where offsite credit trading is being done or being designed, there's actually been more focus on the opportunities of having private landowners, public-private partnerships, and other kinds of arrangements generate those credits being made available for sale. Whoever is generating the credits, I think regulators are going to have and look for a high level of scrutiny on the capabilities of those organizations, and make sure that there's a strong accountability framework so that they're able to, in essence, keep an eye on how these programs work over time, and make sure that there's the capability to take some kind of corrective action if something goes wrong. Daniel?
Yeah, so from a credit program and credit generator perspective, from the credit program perspective, private generation might help take the burden off the need for public generation. However, a program is a bit more complex with both public and private generation, and so there is more oversight, more complexity a program administrator would have. But only having public generation does limit the flexibility to essentially get projects built. From a credit generator perspective, public generators may be skeptical of private generation, as it does provide competition. Potential private generators would not want to be, however, left out of the market if there's a possibility that they could get into the credit generation game. Chris?
Yeah, from a credit user perspective, I think there's not so much concern about the particular entity that's providing the credits. The the issue really is how big is the marketplace? And obviously, if one has a marketplace that has both public and private and hybrid in there, it means there's going to be more generators, more choice, and more credit availability. I think credit availability is going to be a key element to getting a program going. If you don't have credits, the program will likely not succeed. And so the more choices, from a user perspective, the better. And I think the other thing from a user perspective is that the more you have, the prices might be better. That's the hope. So I'm fairly simple from the user perspective on this one. Daniel.
Okay, now we're going to move on to where can the program operate? And I'll turn it over to Chris to provide some context.
Yeah, so just to shape the discussion, obviously we're going through quite a few items here that and we're not going to go into great depth. We hopefully will get into more depth as following this webinar and in future webinars and future meetings on it. But this slide really points to the geographic scale of the program, defining where the credits generated can be used. In my view, it's sort of the critical component of whether a credit program is viable. If it's too small, then a viable credit market might not exist. And if it's too large, Mississippi River is a watershed, the nexus to water quality improvement in receiving waters may be lost. So there are many credit and trading programs use watershed as the geographic area. Doesn't have to be that. It's conceivable that it could be done at the jurisdictional level, but most are at the watershed level. So clearly there are a number of different scales of watershed delineation. USGS uses hydrologic unit codes such as 10 and 12 to define different watershed scales. And the regional boards' basin plans have their own hydrologic units for water quality planning purposes. So that out there are some examples of sort of trading areas. And as I said before, it is conceivable that a single jurisdiction could have a trading program with political versus hydrologic boundaries. And that would likely render some interesting complexities. So Dave, I'll turn it over to you to talk about the regulatory issues to do with trading area.
Well, I think regulatory agencies will be most interested in ensuring that water quality is protected and hopefully improving throughout the trading area, and particularly in impaired streams, rivers, lakes that are located within that area. However the program is organized, it needs to be clear that allowing offsite controls will not create localized hotspots or allow current high pollutant generating discharges to continue causing impairments. Now, how you evaluate and measure these things is not obvious. Permitting agencies may focus on different geographical scales in evaluating effects on specific receiving waters versus overall watershed health. So the devil really will be in the details in looking at how you evaluate compliance within watersheds. On one hand, you could limit the geographical area in which trades could be made and minimize the potential for creating local hotspots or for kind of exporting the benefits of the stormwater controls far away from the site where the stormwater is being generated. On the other hand, limiting the scale of trades to a very small area may limit the success and the growth potential of the program and the ability to actually implement more credit generating facilities. And as a result, it could result in a slower improvement of water quality and watershed health at larger scales. One key choice that needs to be made is whether offsite credit trading projects should be located upstream or downstream of the discharge location. And the figure up in the slide kind of shows that choice that needs to be made. Some people developing credit trading programs have developed strong opinions about whether it's better to expect credit generation to be upstream or downstream of a discharge location. Or in some cases, they're saying you don't necessarily need to specify a preference for upstream or downstream if you can ensure that overall water quality is being protected as a result of that credit sale. And so now Daniel's going to talk a little bit about the perspective from the generator and program administrator point of view.
Thanks, Dave. So both credit program administrators or credit programs and credit generators would have a desire for the largest credit trading area possible. And why is that? The larger the credit trading areas means there's more potential credit users. And the use or the sale of the credits quicker means that there's more credit sales is better for the program administrator and for the sustainability of a program. Larger credit trading areas will also result in a quicker return on investment for the credit generator because there are potentially more credit users within that area. For credit programs overall, quicker return on investment means that the ability to construct more credit generation facilities more rapidly and provide improved water quality and watershed health quicker. Smaller areas also means more administrative burden for a credit program administrator. There's more areas that they have to manage, and that just creates more burden, more administration. Now I'll turn it over to Chris, who's going to talk about the credit user perspective.
Yeah, so I gave the context at the beginning, but from a credit user perspective now, it's pretty much the same as what I discussed for the prior slide, which was the larger the credit trading area, it likely means more credit generators and increased availability of credits for sale, and potentially reduced price. So I think obviously if it's too small, there will not be a viable market. If it's too large, I think you have to accept that there is some upper limit, and the issue for discussion will be defining what that upper limit is. So with that, I will turn it over to the next slide to Dave, who will lead it.
Well, we've talked a little bit about who and where. Now we're going to talk about when. There's a variety of timing considerations in developing offsite credit trading programs, and we're going to talk about two of them here. First, it's important for credit programs to be clear about whether credits can be sold and released before those projects are built and operating, or only afterward. Ideally, the projects would all be done before credits are sold, but it may be difficult, especially in the early years of a credit trading program, for credit generators to afford to build the projects completely before the credits are sold. Daniel talked earlier about the differences between credit trading programs, which may rely more on projects being built before or immediately after credits are sold, and fee in lieu projects, which may collect funds for quite a long time before the stormwater control project is actually built and operating. Now, putting on my regulator hat for a moment, I think the permitting agencies would be most concerned here about not allowing too much lag time between purchase of a credit and completion of the offsite project that's supposed to protect and restore water quality. While it may not always be possible to require projects to be completed before the credit is sold, I think we can expect that there will be some limits on how long people can be considered in compliance with permits when they buy credits for projects that have not yet been built. So Daniel, perhaps you could share a little bit the credit generator and program operator's perspective.
Yeah, so for a credit generator is looking to have flexibility. And so not having all the capital investment needed to build up front would be part of that flexibility. So there's potential cash flow issues with having to essentially build everything first. From a credit program perspective, a credit program wants more, an administrator wants more simplicity. There's more complexity and burden with credits being available before a credit generator is built. It creates more tracking complexity. There's also this concept of potentially reservation of credits for future use. That could be a possibility, and it could provide some capital for construction of credit generation projects up front, but the use of credits would still be not available until after the credit generator is actually constructed. Chris?
Yeah, from a credit user perspective, I mean, it's the same kind of mantra that I've expressed before, which is that one credit's available and one's flexibility. And particularly in this case here, the alignment of particularly in the development area, it's probably a little less so than in some of the other industrial and commercial, but certainly in the development area, project timing is absolutely critical. And the success of a project is determined by the certainty of being able to move forward. And therefore, if there isn't some flexibility to align a developer project with the credit generation facility construction, there has to be some flexibility. My concern would be that if you have to wait until a credit generation facility is built, it will reduce the number of credits that are available, and it will dampen the credit buying market. And so I think there has to be some flexibility built into it, and it cannot 100% be you have it built and we will come. There's got to be a little wiggle room in there. Back to you, Dave, for part two.
Well, another key timing question is whether credits are going to be in effect forever or only for a limited period of time. Many credit trading programs, and I'm thinking of Grand Rapids, Michigan, for example, are set up to sell credits that have no expiration date. You buy it once. While, for example, the Washington, D.C. program is set up such that the credits expire after a year or two and either have to be renewed or new credits bought elsewhere. So in those cases, you're kind of buying a stormwater service for a period of time. It's simpler to sell permanent credits, most likely, but maybe more difficult to ensure whether they are working properly into the distant future or to account for future land use changes that might happen. On the other hand, setting up credits to expire after a shorter period of time and require renewal or replacement may be much more complicated to administer and to participate in for all of the participants. They could help ensure, though, that these projects operate as advertised while the credit is still in effect. So you may not have those long-term operation and maintenance concerns that you would have with permanently sold credits. So again, doffing my regulatory hat for a second, I think regulatory agencies are really going to just want a program that's reliable and predictable. And however it's designed, they believe that it will deliver the advertised benefits for as long as they're in effect. And I think that the regulatory agencies will set up permits that maybe provide different ways to provide that certainty. And tracking and reporting elements of the program will be particularly important to make sure that there's accountability over time. Daniel?
Yeah, so from a credit generator perspective, credit generators want a streamlined program. And most credit generators would not want the additional burden for recertification of credits if they do expire. So I think most credit generators would want credits to be generated and then live on in perpetuity. From an overall credit program perspective, simplicity is better, as it creates more work for recertification of credits. And then there's associated inspections and audits, review, and so forth on an ongoing basis versus, yes, there's still inspections that would need to be for credits that don't expire. But there's a whole lot more that goes into a recertification process with review of applications, verification, and so forth. Chris?
Yeah, I think the credit user would generally not want credits to expire and have to be repurchased or recertified or whatever the terminology would be. I think it would create considerable uncertainties after the initial credit purchase. I think one of the issues to really think about is if it is a development project as opposed to the industrial, commercial, transportation that we talked about before, ultimately the developer goes away. And so there's the issue of succession to the developer. Who is the successor that would be involved in those particular issues? And so I think that's a significant issue. And then there's also sort of the cost factor. You're creating additional work, whereas with the other ways you were looking at the user being a sort of almost a one and done. You set it up at the beginning and then you're done. So with that, I will turn it back to I think Daniel.
Me, I think, yeah. Hey, I'll just note that we were getting some great questions in the Q&A place, and I encourage you to keep those coming. We will have time to get to many of those questions when we're done. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to Daniel to talk some more about who might be administering these programs.
So yeah, that's our next question, right? Administration of a program can be performed by a capable MS4 agency or other public agency, NGO, or private contracted entity, or it could be a joint power authority. And I emphasize capable, right? There is a lot of tasks and elements that go into program administration, including review and approval of applications, credit tracking, advertisement of credits, financial management, reporting, inspections, and audits. So whatever agency that you're picking, you want to make sure that there is capacity and capableness to actually administer a program. With that, I'll turn it over to Dave to talk about the regulatory perspective.
I think most regulators, as I've said, are really going to be most interested in ensuring that there's a clearly identified, capable, and responsible entity administering the program who will perform those functions that Daniel listed that are required of a smoothly functioning program. I get some sense that some of the permitting agencies may have some preference for working with the folks they're already working with. But I also am hearing openness to consider other arrangements to work with NGOs or other potential operators who a permittee, an MS4, for example, might decide to set up to help administer this kind of thing. Daniel, back to you.
Yeah, from a credit generator perspective, they want a straightforward and clear process to be approved as a credit generator, and a straightforward inspection and reporting process. The last thing that we want to do is hold back the generation of credits through bureaucratic delays. And so I re-emphasize that, at least from a credit generator perspective, we'd want an administrator that has the capableness and the capacity to properly administer a program, so we don't get bogged down in delays. A credit generator does want an efficient administrator, and we don't want to see delays in the generation, in credit generation and credit use approvals. Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. One thing Daniel didn't say was that the administrator has to be paid. So obviously it's paid through the transactions between the generator and the user. So obviously the credit user wants a simplified and timely process, just like the generator does, and approval of credit use to be streamlined and effective. And bureaucracy could add significant costs. So, and that means that the administrator in the middle does get paid, but you want to pay the administrator as little as you can. And so with that, I'll turn it back to Daniel to close up.
Actually, this is back over to Dave to provide some context about how much credit is generated and available for sale. Dave?
Yes, now we're going to dig just a little deeper than we have so far. Now, you might think that a gallon of stormwater captured is the same no matter how or where you do it, and that all of the credits generated by a credit generator can be sold. But in reality, there are many kinds of uncertainties that could affect the ability of credit generating projects to perform as they promised. And there may also be policy goals that lead you to reserve some credits for being sold at all. Now, these include questions about, for example, drop-offs in BMP effectiveness over time if they're not properly maintained, accounting for the distance between a project location and the location of the discharger buying the credit, and lag time between the sale and the construction of credit projects. As I said, there may also be strong interest in ensuring that there's overall net environmental benefit when a crediting program is authorized and implemented. As Daniel discussed before, crediting programs may limit the amount of generated credit available for sale or require crediting ratios, which would mean requiring purchase of, say, 1.5 acre-feet of offsite stormwater capture capability for every acre-foot that you discharge on site. Now, putting on the regulator hat for a moment, I think the regulatory agencies are likely to be concerned about potentially different pollutant levels coming from different land uses in different parts of a watershed, and for the potential that we would continue localized water quality degradation when credit trading is used if we're not careful to make sure that those effects are being properly offset. Overall, they want to make sure that water quality goals are met and that ideally we do get net environmental benefit and reduce pollutants and improve water quality in our target watersheds. And I think overall, they're going to want to make sure that we do account for these potential uncertainties that we listed before. Daniel?
Yeah, from a from a credit program perspective, there's a desire for a simpler program for ease and review of credit generation applications. And that means more credits, and having more credits available means more potential credit generation projects and more likelihood of credit user and purchase. A very complex program that goes into land use multipliers and different calculations just limits the ability of a program to actually be used, right? And so we want to see a credit program administrator want to see the most streamlined program possible, right? And having these adjustments be very straightforward and easy for both the credit generators and the credit users to understand. A credit generator obviously wants a higher percentage of credits for sale. What does that mean for them? That means a better bottom line. Chris?
Yep. Thanks, Daniel. I mean, I think the user perspective is very similar to the generator perspective on this one here. I heard what Dave said about complexity, you know, that you can have these multipliers and things like that. You know, one of the likely outcomes of that is that a user, instead of simply buying the credits and moving on, is going to now have to hire the engineers to do studies, just like they would to design, you know, their BMPs on site. You're getting into complexity, and I think simplicity versus complexity needs to be looked at as a key issue. Obviously, the more contingencies you have, the lower availability of credits, the increase the credit cost, and potentially they will be perceived by users as having less value to them as an offsite option. It becomes the bar. It's another way of forming a bar is to create complexity in there. So with that, I guess I'm up next on who can use credits is the issue. And then we didn't think this would be a long conversation because we've kind of covered it earlier in the presentation, but there are a couple of issues that we wanted to bring up that we have not touched on before that are pretty important. And we were talking in the issue of complexity as sort of raising the bar on the user of being able to use credits. There are some programs and some permits right now which have a requirement for an on-site feasibility analysis. Essentially, if you can do it on site, then you have to do it on site, and so it's if it's feasible to do it, you should do it. Whereas the other way with the credit program is that you can go straight to the credit market. It is open immediately, and so that's sort of a discussion item. And some current permits actually have such barriers in them. The second thing is kind of the broader discussion of greenfield development, which is areas that have not formally been subject to development. The issue here is whether greenfield development should be sort of excluded from a credit program, because it's felt that they potentially have the land and the space and the opportunity to use these systems. And also that potentially maybe this is unpolluted land. And so if you allow them to use credits, that you would, it would be different than in a developed area. You would be allowing pollution in a previously unpolluted area. And so that's sort of the context for the discussion. And I'm sure with respect to the more general issue of who can use the credits, both Dave and Daniel can chime in on any additional issues. But Dave, you got some thoughts on this one?
Well, I think permitting agencies are going to scrutinize pretty carefully whether the kinds of discharges for whom offsite crediting is being authorized are really appropriate for this approach. I'm hearing, for example, a lot of people discussing potential concerns about enabling industrial stormwater discharges to participate in offsite crediting. I think it'll be important that they provide for evaluation of whether offsite controls in one type of land use or location really does effectively offset the discharge that's allowed to continue. Now, there may also be concerns about allowing polluting discharges to continue in more industrialized or highly developed areas, many of which may be located in relatively disadvantaged neighborhoods of our cities. While authorizing offset projects at other locations that elsewhere in the watershed that would become less polluted and maybe otherwise enjoy the benefits of those projects. So I think that there are some tricky environmental equity questions that we're going to have to look at carefully in the design of these programs to address these kinds of considerations or concerns. Daniel?
Yeah, so from a credit program perspective, touching on the first item of feasibility. So having potential credit users perform a feasibility analysis would restrict the potential number of credit users. And if you don't have this feasibility analysis, then that opens up a wider potential universe of credit users. With more credit users means more credit generators can be implemented, translating into quicker water quality benefits. So basically a credit program administrator, for the most part, wouldn't want to see a feasibility analysis. And from an overarching perspective, not having feasibility analysis may actually benefit from more of an integrated water resources perspective, right? Getting more regional projects water where we can actually use it in the future might be more beneficial. And then on the topic of greenfield versus redevelopment, having only redevelopment does restrict the number of credit users, and a credit program would want the most potential credit users to really have a viable program. From a credit generator perspective, they wouldn't want to see a feasibility analysis requirement either, because that also, it restricts the potential number of credit users that can purchase the credits that they're generating. They also wouldn't want to see a restriction on greenfield development, as that also would restrict the potential number of credit users. Chris?
Yeah, just from the user perspective, I think the on-site feasibility analysis would be a considerable impediment to having a viable pollutant credit program. I think it's that large an issue that it could significantly affect the viability. On the greenfield issue, I certainly understand the sentiments, but I'm sort of in the area where as a credit user, where the generator is, which is getting these programs off the ground and getting sort of the viable dynamics of a generator user marketplace out there is going to need quite some flexibility at the beginning, and putting too many restrictions in place is not going to be helpful to having a viable program. So with that, I will turn the next slide over to Daniel to talk about pricing, which is
yeah, and we haven't really got into this topic yet, but really there's quite a bit here, and we don't expect to try to give all the perspectives or really get into this issue in detail. This could be a whole webinar on itself on how you determine price. But really what we're looking at is either a free market or a fixed price. Now, a fixed price would be an amalgamation of credit generator costs and then the development of a fixed price by the program administrator. And a free market could really be a couple different things, at least two different things. One would be a price set by the credit generator and then fixed for their facility based on their costs and potentially profit if it's a private generation, and not set by the program administrator. And then finally, you could have a situation where the negotiation of price is directly between the buyer and the seller. But this could create significant oversight issues for the program administrator. Free market may encourage more cost-effective projects due to competition. And then advertisement of projects and prices becomes more of a factor in a free market system. There also could be a hybrid option. A program administrator sets an initial price to get the program started, which then sunsets at some point for prices to be set by credit generators. Another significant question related to the price of credits is, one, do you include O&M in perpetuity in the cost in that credit price? Or two, do you just include capital costs with ongoing O&M, having an ongoing O&M fee assessed to an HOA or a commercial management company for the credit users? There's also the issue of replacement costs. As these stormwater capture systems lifespan is not forever, but the generation of credits will need to be in perpetuity. So replacement costs need to be included in the credit price or in the ongoing O&M fee. Dave, a regulatory perspective.
Sure. Thanks, Daniel. I think regulators will be interested in some of the financial details of how the credit trading system works, including the pricing approaches that are selected. But I think they'll be most interested in seeing clear delineation of roles and responsibilities and evidence that there's really financial stability in the way pricing is being set up and financial accountability built in. Back to you, Daniel.
From a credit program perspective, there's definitely more burden to collecting ongoing O&M fees. The watershed scale of trading area creates more complexity for setting prices. But then also thinking about, it's hard to sell a program with O&M included, as credit prices would likely be very expensive. And it also gets very hard to estimate what O&M is really going to cost in perpetuity. From a credit generator perspective, the free market may provide more opportunity for credit generators to be more cost efficient and more competitive. It's better to have prices without O&M, as this would mean cheaper credit prices. And you may also chill the interest of a market for credit users with a high cost of credits, and it may be more expensive than implementing on-site controls. So the idea would be, it would be better to have the O&M outside of the credit prices and as an ongoing fee. Chris?
Yeah, the credit user in this area really wants to pay a fair price for credits, whether it's fixed or free market. As far as the O&M issue, I think that it's been somewhat covered, but I'll just kind of summarize my thoughts on it. The first concern would be that if you're going to pay upfront, you may not get it correct, and these BMPs can last for decades. It's hard enough to do it for 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years, but when you're thinking longer than that, there's a great deal of uncertainty. Upfront O&M payment will massively increase the cost of credits. It'll be a very large amount of money, and resulting increased costs for development purchasers. So the people who have homes, it'll be passed on to the homeowners and the businesses. But that said, upfront O&M may be attractive to some. For example, public infrastructure. Some may want to simply buy and be done. And so I certainly would recognize that one. Ongoing O&M would somewhat mimic what often is done now with respect to post-construction BMPs. It would pass the cost of O&M on to future property owners, such as through an HOA or a commercial association. And so the credits would be lower cost, but there would be sort of an add-on continuing O&M fee for the rest of time. So with that, next slide to Dave on how is O&M of credit generators addressed.
Well, I'm going to say since we've been talking about O&M quite a bit in the last few minutes, I'm just going to kind of cut to the chase and kind of indicate that there are excuse me, there are different legal mechanisms to ensure that good long-term O&M is done, and the details are going to vary depending on local circumstances. And as we've said, in its simplest form, you can pay once up front to cover all costs, or pay capital costs up front and then an ongoing fee of some kind. I think the regulatory agencies are going to be most interested in ensuring that there is long-term O&M, and we'll look to make sure that there's explicit consideration of this in the structure of a credit trading program. Ironically, there may even be more specific provisions for O&M in a credit trading program than there is for other BMPs being developed under other permit requirements. But time will tell on that. Daniel?
Yes, from a credit program perspectives, they really want to ensure that O&M is actually being done and it's completed thoroughly and consistency. As they have mentioned, there's likely going to need to be more robust oversight for O&M of these credit generation facilities. And there is also a concept that we've discussed about, if you have private generation facilities, maybe they require public O&M instead of having the private sector doing the O&M. From a credit generator perspective, they want flexibility on who can perform the O&M. They don't want that to be dictated to them. And they also want a clear process for oversight, inspection, and reporting of O&M that goes on at a credit generation facility. Chris?
Well, the good news here is that users really don't have a responsibility for O&M, so I don't have to say a lot, other than the fact that it's the initial payment or the ongoing payments need to be arranged up at the beginning. Dave raised an issue earlier in the presentation about indemnification to the user in case a generator facility fails, and that obviously is an issue that is going to be important to a user with respect to O&M and potential failure to conduct O&M. So with that, we will move on to the next slide, and we're getting very close to the end here. We'll have a few minutes for questions, which is, so I think we're in good shape. I'm going to provide just sort of a brief summary, and Dave will offer some next steps that we've been thinking about. The three of us have had conversations for a number of weeks, in fact, at a number of conferences before. So we've got some ideas as to how to move forward in this, and he'll talk about those. I think it's important to recognize we've provided kind of a lot of information, probably too much information in a really short time frame, and we haven't gone as deep. I noticed some of the questions are going much deeper than we've been able to get into in this. So take this as a beginning. It's a start of a conversation, not the end. And so we just talk about the motivations and of potential credit users and generators. We've talked about that a lot. Users are likely to be motivated by the ease of getting into different modes of stormwater compliance and the benefit it affords them. I think generators may be motivated by a broader range of issues, such as MS4 permit compliance. Say they have land available. Maybe they're repurposing the land. They've got a huge parking lot they're going to do something with, and they can put a capture facility in there. And maybe people might even be moving into this program from a profit perspective, particularly in the private area. This could be one where people see an opportunity to generate a business. Both users and generators will be looking for a clear and approved program. And I think they'll also be likely need assistance. There's going to have to be some champion who is providing assistance, guidance, support to get these programs operating. And I think one of the biggest challenges at the start will likely be having credits available up front. We had the conversation earlier on about the flexibility of upfront and the like. And so, it's a commitment of resources before any transactions can take place. If the transactions can take place while these things are being built, it will be it creates a lot more flexibility. And I kind of see that government generators may have a role in this getting these programs started. For example, oversizing capital improvement projects would be one vehicle for, the BMPs on capital improvement projects could be one way to grease the wheels of getting a program started. I think another key to starting a stormwater credit program is to engage the community and the regulatory agencies. We've tried to, in our conversation here with Dave, serving as a circuit for the regulatory agencies, tried to recognize the importance of those and also the community and the environmental groups that are out there. I think there could be distrust from you'd be moving away from a site-by-site compliance approach, and that there could be diminished water quality. And I think to have a program that works, you need to set high standards and build trust, clear and transparent mechanisms. O&M is going to be, we've talked about that quite a bit, is a significant one. I think there has to be close oversight of the generator facilities. And as Daniel discussed earlier, there needs to be a sort of a net watershed benefit to the program. I think all three of us in our conversations have viewed that is important. It's obviously a conversation and piece going forward, but all three of us felt that benefit as opposed to a break-even outcome was most appropriate. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dave to bring us home.
But wait, there's more, which is the good thing. There's a lot of moving parts here, as you can tell. But the good news is there's growing experience and success around the country in building and beginning to operate these kinds of programs, and many communities in the state in the process or at different steps in their process of developing offsite crediting programs, and a huge amount of interest among additional communities and dischargers in doing so. So we are proposing to do some additional webcasts in which we can bring in some operators of existing crediting programs so you can hear their stories more directly and ask them questions more directly. But importantly, we're proposing to form kind of a stormwater crediting think tank in which volunteers can work together to determine how we can increase our collective capacity in California to develop, permit, and implement effective offsite crediting programs. People are looking for some help in navigating these issues, and we're hoping that our think tank can help us do that and create that capacity. And we want to involve everybody in this. Discharging organizations, the regulatory agencies, NGOs, other experts, consultants, and so forth. And this effort may include development of a statewide stormwater credit trading policy or guidance document or something like that. The state board has indicated interest in potentially doing that. So what we need from you is your interest. If you are interested in getting involved in this, we're asking you to send your contact information to any of us. And on the next slide, you'll see our contact information. And then we will get this going. So we are confident that there's enough interest here and enough expertise that together we can get better at this and move this kind of option forward as part of our stormwater management toolbox. So with that, I'll turn it back to Daniel. Or actually to Amanda to start taking questions. Sorry.
Well, just a couple final words. So as Dave mentioned, if you have any interest in joining our stormwater accrediting think tank, please email us, and our email addresses are identified here. I want to say thank you to my co-presenters and a big thank you to the Storms Unit for having us present this webinar today. With that, we'll be taking questions now through the Q&A tool. If we don't, as Amanda mentioned before, if we don't have time to get to your question, we will be answering all the questions asked via communication through the Stormwater Unit. And if you have questions after today, please email us as well. With that, I'll turn it back over to Amanda, who will be facilitating the Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, you guys. This was a fantastic panel discussion presentation. I learned a lot, and it looks like there's a lot of interest in what you guys talked about. We have bunch of questions, which we will not have time to go through all of them today in the 8 minutes that we have left. But I'm trying to kind of go through and pick out some of the important, or not important, but some of the ones that I think are broad and would relate to folks here. And I think one of the ones that has come up a couple times, are there examples of credit trading programs that are going on right now that we could take a look at, that we could use to as an example, perhaps within California and across the U.S.?
So I'll just mention maybe from a California perspective. So there is actually a program I mentioned before. I've been helping with the city of Anaheim. It's actually out for public review right now. So there are publicly available documents. It hasn't been approved yet, but it is available for public review. I'm not aware of any program in California. I know there's guidance that has been approved, but a program that is actually working yet, and I'm not aware of it. There are some programs, as David's mentioned, on a national basis. The DC program has been in existence for quite some time, and Dave, you may mention some others.
Well, I'll just mention, I mean, in addition to Washington, DC, Grand Rapids, Michigan, Cook County in the Chicago area, Chattanooga, Tennessee. There are other communities that have them on the books, but haven't really gotten much on the ground. Here in California, in addition to Orange County, a lot of really good work being done in Contra Costa County, city of San Pablo in the Bay Area. There are some provisions in the Lake Tahoe water quality program and their permit to allow offsite work to be done, although not a lot has been implemented under that provision to date. And I'm aware of at least a half a dozen other communities in California that are either developing programs or going through the feasibility analysis to consider doing that. So there is some success to build on, and some people are learning a lot during these early stages of development that we can draw upon.
Excellent, thank you. Another question that I have that kind of piqued my interest. Let's see, my concern regarding offsite program is one of environmental justice, particularly regarding industrial users, i.e. the emissions continue where they are impacting lower income folks. Do you guys have thoughts on that?
Well, I mentioned that is a concern, and I think it's true, not just of industrial discharges, but people are wondering, well, how can you let somebody continue discharging high levels of pollutants if you're taking care of the problem elsewhere? I mean, one way that other accrediting programs have looked at this is to expect the offsite project to actually be upstream, so that there is a reduction in pollutants coming from upstream that are enough to either offset or more than offset the discharge from that particular place, so that the water quality ends up being either the same or better that it would have been just through, continuation of that discharge or control of that discharge at the on-site location. And so I think this is where the analytics are going to be very important to kind of look at, if we do offsite controls in different locations, how do we make sure that we're not allowing a bad situation to continue, or conceivably even make it worse through allowing kind of hotspots to develop.
I think additionally, and we brought this up before, for the credit users, we're not saying that they don't have to do anything. We talked about having them do site design and source control BMPs, and especially for industrial dischargers, that's going to be really critical, the source control element specifically. Also, the placement of where the credit generation facilities are located is also a big component that we didn't even touch on really in our presentation today. And from an environmental justice perspective, those citing of placing them in areas where there could be, significant benefits from discharges of, such as industrial discharges, where you're treating from a regional perspective in where there's industrial discharges in that drainage area, could be one way of addressing that issue as well.
Great, thanks, you guys. Okay, I'm going through, there's so many questions in here. And you guys keep answering them as I'm looking through them, so I don't need to ask quite so many. There's one here that's kind of a multi-part question. I think this will be the last one that I'm asking here. It's got a couple of upvotes. When regulating a credit program, to what extent should regulatory agencies link this to a watershed management planning element of a permit? Should the regulatory agency ask to see the plan for future credit generators, their siting criteria, or the processes the credit generating entity will use to cite credit generators? Or should the approval of a credit program be completely disconnected from how credit generators are planned and cited? Or is there an optimal medium to which credit generator planning elements should be linked to an approval of a credit trading system program?
So Dave, that's more of a regulator question. Do you want to take that? I have some
Well,
thoughts.
I'll
Go ahead.
start just real quickly and saying first, there were a lot of parts in that
Yeah.
question.
Take
but
what
I
you
will
can with the
say,
3 minutes that we have.
I think the answer is where people have other kind of watershed management planning responsibilities through their permits. I do think that where it's envisioned that offsite credit trading is going to be part of the future solutions in that watershed, it does make sense to account for that possibility as part of sort of the overall toolbox of implementation approaches that a watershed plan is supposed to articulate. And I think how much detail about the connection between the programs is necessary in a WQIP or watershed management plan, that's going to kind of depend. But I think that it does make sense to integrate into the overall structure of stormwater management under these programs, what is being discussed through offsite crediting. And I think there's different ways to do that, because the last thing we want to do is have totally uncoordinated stuff going on stormwater management. God forbid that would happen. Daniel, you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I've actually thought about this quite a bit, and partially because in my work in developing stormwater credit programs, I also help in the development of watershed plans and planning watershed projects. And so credit generation facilities basically can help with meeting the goals of a watershed plan. It's a funding program, but in a watershed management plan, for the most part, what you're looking at is implementing controls that will capture stormwater. Well, that's exactly what these systems do. And there's also a temporal aspect to the fact that you're going to implement these systems. And then in many cases, you're going to have a long period of time until those credits are used. So you're going to get that net water quality benefit for a longer period of time. Not to mention, in watershed management plans, you're meeting volumetric metrics, right? You're trying to meet that. Credit generation facilities are helping you do that. So there's an integration there. As far as how they're regulated together, I think that still needs to be thought of. We see stormwater credit programs as a tool to help get to those thresholds of stormwater capture that are really needed in implementing watershed management.
Yeah, the only comment I would add there is, and I agree with everything that's been said before, is that a watershed management plan is very programmatic, and we're not sure at the moment how programmatic generated facilities will be. And so that's going to be the challenge, is how you bring something that may be sort of market driven or otherwise into something which is very much more a streamlined program. So that, I think, is going to be the biggest challenge, but I think it's a very useful discussion to have.
Yeah, thanks. And I think that's a good way to wrap this up, a good summary of what we talked about today. So I want to give my panel a big thank you again for coming and spending time talking to everybody. And I want to thank all of the attendees for showing up and listening and giving us all these great questions. We will be sending out a PDF of the slides to everybody that signed up for this. We will also be pulling all the questions together and trying to answer as many as we can and sending that out to the attendees as well. You have everybody's contact information up here. And I think that's it. Thanks again, everyone, for coming and listening to us for an hour and a half on your busy day.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Yep, thanks.